Okay, so here we're going to talk about wrestling and combat sports. So we're going to look at some different types of martial arts and fighting sports. Again, similar to the football and track, we'll get into specifics about these sports, and we'll mention some means of training that can be utilized but aren't necessarily just unique to this. So as I said, in a lot of the previous talks, I mentioned how I'd mentioned some novel ways of addressing certain physical qualities, and I'll kind of talk about them within these sports, even though sometimes they're not necessarily just exclusive to them. So first, let's talk a little bit about the energy systems, as I'll do with most of these. Now, for the most part, what I'm going to do is break a lot of these down. The first one will represent the ATP-PC system. The second one will be the lactic or the glycolytic, and the third number will represent the aerobic. Now, if you see here, 90-10-0 as far as most combat sports and wrestling. Now, again, the 0 for the aerobic doesn't necessarily mean that the aerobic, again, doesn't have to be addressed, but what it means is, as far as it being a primary driver of what goes on, it's not relevant. However, from the standpoint of having an aerobic base and being able to recover from bouts, it is still going to be important, okay? So that's important to note. Now, as far as how energy systems, again, this is kind of a broad brush. You need to take the one way to look at it is look at the length of time when you're looking at these different combat sports. Look at the length of time you're in contact with opponents. So, for instance, if you look at boxing and karate, those tend to be more what we would call short contact combat sports. So they're a little bit more high speed strength type sports. Because if you think about boxing and karate and the tactics that are involved with it, it's primarily striking. So it's that short contact. Whereas things like judo, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, those tend to be more long contact, and those have a little bit more of an emphasis on maximum strength. Okay. Now, another important thing to kind of examine, particularly with the long contact sports, is what type of muscular contraction regimens at play. Here we want to look at isometrics and the importance of isometrics, particularly in the long contact sports like wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and also look at how the strength aerobic method can apply, will be very important with those sports as well. Now, we tend to talk about the glycolytic mechanism not being as important. However, when you get into particularly the long contact sports, the glycolytic mechanism is going to become more valuable. So this is actually taken right from Yuri Verkhoshansky's book. So ways to increase the glycolytic power mechanism, doing a 30 to 50 second bout, 3 reps of that with about 1.5 to 2 minutes rest, and doing 3 series of that could help increase the power. For capacity, 1.5 to 2 minutes, 3 reps, resting 2 minutes, and you can gradually decrease the rest period and do that for about 3 series. So this is just 2 examples of how to address the glycolytic mechanism with these sports. Now, again, you can also, typically, when you're adjusting the time frames for these, you can usually lower the time frames. You usually can't increase them, because if you increase them, it's going to get you out of the energy system. So, for instance, for power, you want to do slightly lower time frames. So instead of 30 to 50, go 20 to 30. And, maybe what you would do in that instance is just increase your overall volume and reduce the rest period slightly. You can do that. So these are just examples. They can be adapted from the times, but it gives you an idea as far as how to address the glycolytic mechanism functionally for this. And you'll see later on, actually, with this, some practical examples as to how to address the glycolytic mechanism for these different sports. Okay, maximum strength. So again, can contribute to success in specific muscular contractions for the sport. So again, it's just going to allow some much greater force to be produced. And I have a quote up here: "A stronger person is harder to kill than a weaker person." Kind of shedding some light on the fact that again, a lot of times fighters, many times, strength could certainly be a major value for them. I mean, obviously, again, technique and everything is still important, but sometimes, someone's overall strength just being that much better can kind of assist a person. And if you look at, I always say in MMA, I think it's a good comparison when you look at when Brock Lesnar first came into the UFC. He didn't have a ton of experience, but he had a lot of success early on, and a lot of his success, I mean, he obviously was we know of his success in wrestling, but in my opinion, a big portion of his success was his overall athletic ability and his strength that really tended to help him. I mean, he was by far stronger and just more overall just athletic than a lot of the guys he fought. And I think a lot of them had a lot more experience in fighting, but I think his just overall strength, I think he just overwhelmed individuals. So, that just goes to show you how important max strength is. And think about strengthening important areas. So in fighting, the neck, the upper traps, the arms gets to be very important. Not that you necessarily have to work them in a maximum strength regimen, because obviously, like for instance, the upper traps tend to respond, a lot of times more to higher rep schemes, but still building strength and muscular balance in those areas can certainly be a benefit to these athletes. Okay, now as I said, aerobic ability is going to be very important. Again, even though at the beginning I talked, it got a 0 in the column for aerobic ability, fighters still need to have an aerobic mechanism in order to, to recover and in order to generate what they can do over the course of a fight. So again, tempo runs would be important here. We talked about extensive tempo when discussing football and track. It's the same idea here. Now, again, some people will argue, and it's not inherently wrong, that fighting doesn't require, there's not a running requirement in fighting, and that's very true. So does a fighter have to run? Not necessarily. If you want to do other things, for instance, special strength circuits can be used for aerobic capacity. I'll talk about the special strength circuits when we discuss soccer, but what you'll basically do will do shorter work and rest intervals versus what you would do with soccer. So I discussed the special strength circuits with when I discuss soccer, but that's how you would basically adapt that for fighters. And typically maybe about like a 10 seconds worth of work, 50 seconds of rest, and what you would do is basically repeat that in regards to the strength circuit. So we'll talk about that when we get into soccer, but that just kind of shows you that there's different work rest intervals, but still the same concept can apply. Sled dragging also works really good for this purpose. So if you don't want to have them run, because you're concerned about, I mean, obviously, if you do a big volume of running and fighters aren't going to necessarily be sprinters. They may not have the best running gait. If you're concerned about that from an injury perspective, sled dragging is another great thing. You could certainly build up aerobic capacity, plus you're also working the muscles a little differently. Okay, well, for the lactic system, again, we said particularly for the long contact fighters, you might want to do some glycolytic circuits. Again, you just need to watch how often they're used. You need to make sure their work capacity is high enough. So these could be done 1 to 3 times per week. 3 is going to be the high end. Again, the thing is with the lactic or glycolytic system, you have to consider that a high intensity stressor. Okay, so that's something important to note. You have to consider it a high intensity stressor. So here's something, I got this right from a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu strength and conditioning book put together by Chad Wesley Smith. he basically has a 30 seconds on, 50 seconds off, and about 8 to 10 movements for the lactic system. So the numbers are slightly shorter than Verkhoshansky's, but again, you're still essentially working the lactic system here. So you're still kind of addressing that lactic capacity component. You're just basically, shortening the rest periods a little bit. You're not working the minute and a half to 2 minutes for capacity. So it does match up with the power, but you're not taking long rest periods. You're taking shorter rest periods. So this would be more of a capacity thing. It's just, like I said, you're shortening the time, but you're also shortening the rest as well, to still get the volume in to address that. And then for speed and explosive power, again, you're really not changing a whole lot here. Again, sprints, if you want to have them run sprints, they can. I would keep them short, 40 yards maximum. Keep your total down. Again, jumps, any one of your jumps and throws, as far as that, I think a lot of the combination jumps and throws with a medicine ball work really well. If you don't want to do Olympic lifts, they can certainly take the place of those, the backward scoop toss and just the forward jump and throw. Certainly all still work triple extension and can help improve on explosive abilities. And then again, always using the dynamic effort method. And just as one example of the dynamic effort method, doing 12 sets of 2. So that's not 2 sets of 12. That's 12 sets of 2. 60 to 70%. Again, we've given different ranges for this. Again, a lot of it, you just want the bar speed to be fast. And in this situation, you might want to lower the rest period just a little bit more. If you read a lot or listen to Louis, he will talk more closer to a minute and a half rest for power lifters, but he does for athletes like to shorten the rest periods a little bit. Again, just to kind of help build up some of their general physical preparedness. So that's another way you can build the speed and explosive power. And again, the percentages are a guideline. Here you'd be looking a little bit more at speed strength. You could lower it if you want to work more explosive strength in that situation. So again, just get understand the energy system demands, which again we'll be outlining for all of the individual sports, and again, just some of the special strength methods for improving the qualities in these particular athletes.